Classified audio file. Intercepted transmission subject. T. Miller, former security commander, Groom Lake Facility. If you're hearing this, it's because the file escaped. I recorded it on an offline terminal, triple encoded with redundancy, and distributed it across networks that shouldn't even exist anymore. My name is Thomas Miller, former head of security at the Groom Lake Facility. Yes, the damned Area 51. I was loyal. I followed orders. I buried secrets that could collapse civilizations. But what we discovered on August 19th transcended anything human. This is not about aliens. It's about something that pre-exists us, something that was sealed for a reason. And we broke that reason. It was supposed to be just a recalibration. Seismic sensors had been registering unusual noises under Sector Delta, as if something were moving beneath the rock. We opened the main hatch of what they called the fossil level, a subterranean layer that didn't appear on any of my maps. The workers were nervous. The air down there was denser, with a hot, metallic smell, and even with the suits you could feel a vibration in your chest. Not in your ear, in your bone. Every step in that corridor made the floor seem to breathe. I should have shut it all down, but the order was already in motion, and they wanted to see what lay below. We descended 7 levels beyond protocol. We found a circular chamber with non-human inscriptions carved into a material that looked like vitrified bone. In the Aishumd center stood a sarcophagus, or perhaps a capsule, black, covered by a substance resembling solid pitch. The scientists said it was some kind of organic metal, but it pulsed. It emitted heat patterns. It seemed to listen to our movements. Dr. Reeves was the first to approach. He didn't touch it, he only stood inches away. And then he fell to his knees, bleeding from his eyes, repeating in screams a phrase no one understood. The geometry doesn't close. They ignored what happened. They took Reeves away. They gave him haloperidol and sedated him. I went to the command office and requested the team's evacuation. The directive came in writing, stamped with the ultra-secret seal of the Shadow Command for Advanced Technology. Proceed, interdimensional material of interest, Level 9. No one there knew what Level 9 meant, not even me. I began to understand we were under another jurisdiction. They answered to neither the Air Force nor the NSA. This came from another level, something above any known government. And the truth is, we had no choice. The material around the capsule seemed to respond to human presence. As soon as someone entered the room, the lights flickered and the monitors detected previously unrecorded frequencies. The strange thing was that these emissions came from inside the structure, yet there was no visible power source, as if the metal itself were thinking. On the 3rd day, the inscriptions began to change position. Literally, entire symbols slid across the surface like living organisms. Some appeared on the base walls, others beneath the researcher's skin. Codes, prime numbers, fractal patterns, but nobody wanted to stop because funding had tripled that morning. Dr. Lang was next to collapse. They found him in the fetal position, repeating the coordinates of a star not listed on any astronomical map. That was no coincidence. I began to suspect the capsule wasn't a container at all, but an interface, or worse, a communication anchor. Something, or someone, on the other side, was trying to synchronize with us, and it was succeeding. Security cameras began distorting. Sometimes they showed angles that didn't exist, corridors that had never been built, and figures, faceless humanoid silhouettes, standing motionless, watching. On the 4th night, the containment sirens blared for no reason. When I reached Sector Delta, the core of the capsule was open, leaking a dark light. Yes, dark, as if it sucked in the surrounding detail. It didn't illuminate, it concealed. 3 men on my team went blind. Their pupils simply dilated until they vanished. One of them, Alvarez, tore out his own teeth with his hands, screaming that they were transmitting through him. And that's when I made the mistake. I stepped closer. The light touched my face, and in that second, I felt as if my mind had been scanned, as if they had rifled through my thoughts since birth. Since that day, I'm not the same. My memories began to fail. I remember events that never happened. I see people who never existed, but the worst are the dreams. Always the same setting, a city built in concentric circles under an utterly motionless sky. A hum fills everything, constant, like a language trying to form. I wake with marks on my body, symmetrical, millimetric. Tests show no toxins, yet the tissue is changing. Cellularly, it's as if something is converting me into another structure. And deep inside, I know, they're still transmitting. The next morning, access. Protocols failed. Magnetic cards, biometrics, voice recognition, nothing opened the doors to the lower wing. Yet someone was inside. Internal cameras showed figures walking the corridors of Section 7, even though no technicians were scheduled there. We went in with full reinforcement. When we arrived, the hallway was covered in moisture. Not water, but a translucent substance dripping down the walls. It pulsed as if alive. At the end of the sector, the capsule was no longer on its platform. It was standing upright and open. What emerged wasn't a creature. It was a field, a distortion, a moving curvature in space, as if the air were twisting around an invisible point. It cast no shadow, but it distorted reality. One of the soldiers raised his weapon, and his arm disappeared from mid-forearm downward. No sound, no scream, only the gun falling to the floor as blood evaporated instantly. The field moved as if breathing, and for a second I was certain it looked at me, but not with eyes. It looked at me as an equation looks at a variable. We were removed from the mission immediately. The base was sealed. A new team was sent in. Hermes Unit 12, men with no identification, no insignia, no names, and they all knew exactly what to do, as if trained for this. I tried to warn, tried to send reports. Nothing. The emails bounced back. My accesses were revoked. 3 days later, I began to experience blackouts. I woke up in places I didn't remember going. I saw lights blinking where there was no wiring. I began to hear a constant hum in my teeth, as if something were tuning me, like an antenna. In the pre-dawn hours of the 31st, I met Solomon. He was the leader of the old 1982 mission, the one officially abandoned after the so-called Tartarus event. No one spoke of it anymore, yet he appeared at my house, gaunt, hollow-eyed, looking as if he hadn't slept in years. He said, "What you've unleashed doesn't want to destroy, it wants to mirror." He handed me an envelope. Inside were 7 rules, all scrawled by hand. The last read, "If you begin writing the symbols, stop. If you cannot stop, run." By then, I had already written down 4 of them. The problem was no longer the capsule. It was what it had activated or unlocked within us. I began noticing small lapses in time, not in the sense of forgetting things. I literally lost entire minutes. My coffee would warm, the radio station would change, the bathroom light would stay on, though I was sure I'd switched it off. But the worst was when I looked in the mirror. My reflection was delayed, a fraction of a second. Sometimes it blinked when I did not. Sometimes it remained still even after I'd left the room. I tried filming it. I recorded for 4 nights. In the 4th video, at minute 02:36, my reflection was watching me with an expression I never made, as if it knew I was recording, as if it were waiting. I returned to the lab to recover files from the first days. I wanted proof, something to justify. Calling an outside committee, even at the risk of being silenced, I managed to hack the old cryptographic sections system and recover part of the thermal footage from the capsule's initial opening. What appeared wasn't heat. It was a life form, an entity composed of thermal patterns shifting at impossible speeds. The base's AI tried to translate the pattern into protocol language. What it produced was a chart, a circle within a circle within a circle, and at the center, the word origin. That was not a creature. It was living code, a kind of mathematical structure manifesting through us, shaping our perception of reality like clay in a sculptor's hands. And that's when the dreams began to expand. I no longer slept. It was like passing through a veil. Every time I closed my eyes, I woke somewhere different from where I'd been. The same motionless sky, the same hum. But now I saw shapes, giant towers floating above deserts of blue sand, humanoid figures suspended in the air like puppets, with no strings, and they looked at me, not with hostility but with expectation, as if I'd been summoned. One morning I woke to the words, "You have been chosen," etched on my window glass from the inside. I thought I was delirious. But analysis showed traces of a metallic substance in the writing, nickel, titanium and carbon, with a half-life incompatible with any known element. It hadn't been written by me, or by any human. The final straw came when I received a yellow envelope with no return. Address delivered by a common civil courier carrying paperwork between departments. Inside was a photograph of me taken from above. Me walking alone in Sector 9 of the base, on a day and at a time when I wasn't there. In the image, I was looking up straight at the camera, but the detail was that my eyes were pitch black, like two obsidian spheres. Along with the photo was a mechanically printed note. "It's already in you." I burned the photo, but the image remains in my mind as if tattooed on my retina. The truth is, this isn't about security, science, or protocol anymore. It's about conversion. Something is crossing into our world, and it's using people like me to do it. After that, I began seeing patterns everywhere. Equations once confined to base equipment now appeared in everyday places. Cracks in walls, scratches on car windows, folds in my own arm. I tried to keep my sanity by cataloguing everything in a notebook, dream frequencies, strange events, repeated words. But the more I wrote, the more the symbols seemed to shift before my eyes. One of them, the one resembling an inverted hexagon with elongated vertices, began to repeat. It appeared in dreams, on surfaces, and eventually in the mirror. It was always the same, like a kind of signature. I started calling it the key of origin, and I think that's what they're trying to insert into us. A key, a code, a type of dimensional alignment. Solomon reappeared once more, this time in a clandestine video conference among former Tartarus mission staff. He looked even more debilitated, his skin ashen, his eyes so deep you could barely see light reflecting from them. He said that in 1982 they also found a similar structure, but back then it was inert. The problem began when one of the agents drew one of the symbols on paper, just on impulse. 3 days later, the equations began to replicate throughout the base like a virus of meaning. They didn't understand what they were facing. They tried to seal it, bury it, forget it. But according to Solomon, it's not something you can erase because it's not physical. It's mathematical. It's symbiotic. The symbol reads you, understands you, and if you're compatible, it remakes you from within. That's when I realized what we'd been calling the anomaly or entity might have been just an interface, a lens, as if the capsule, the symbols, the dreams, all were part of a single contact protocol. But contact with what? There is no creature, no alien. Intelligence like you see in movies. No voice in the dark. There is only a structural presence, something operating behind the scenes of reality, like an algorithm that's always been running, waiting for the correct variable. And that variable is us. Our bodies, our tissue, our neural code. I began to feel constant tingling at the nape of my neck. Then came the interferences, moments when everything went silent. Sounds, thoughts, motor impulses, and for a few seconds, I wasn't here. I was somewhere else, a plane of endless geometric patterns where forms breathed and gravity inverted. I stopped leaving home, total isolation. I no longer trusted mirrors or reflective surfaces. One day, I saw my reflection write something on the wall before I did. And there it was, scratched in white paint seconds later. They're hiding this. I couldn't remove it. I tried to flee the country, but my documents were flagged. Every attempt at boarding triggered identity blocks. Some alert no one can explain. The system logged intermittent biometric incompatibility. It's not an error, they know, and they want to contain me. But the truth is already inside. This thing no longer needs me to move. It's spreading through files, frequencies, brainwaves, language, and if you're reading this, you may have been exposed too. After a week in isolation, I noticed my dreams had changed patterns. Before, I only observed. Now I interacted. It was as if each night took me to a new phase, as if I were being trained, conditioned. I walked endless corridors with floating symbols in the air. I touched them and felt memories that weren't mine. Wars on planets of impossible geometry. Civilizations devoured by concepts never meant to be understood. Wordless voices said that reality is an unstable structure sustained by collective observation, and that something, an origin flaw, was about to tear that fabric. I woke drenched, my heart pounding, but with the strange conviction it wasn't a dream. It was instruction. Changes in my body also intensified. Doctors said I had synaptic hyperactivity, as if my brain were generating impulses 10 times above normal. But I felt no pain, only expansion, as if my mind were forced to open channels evolution had not yet activated. I began to understand languages I never studied, Sanskrit, Aramaic, mathematical formulas that seemed natural to me. My sense of smell sharpened. I could tell when someone was lying just by their sweat. I began to hear things at frequencies others couldn't. Electric whispers in power grids, names of places never mentioned publicly, terms like Isis's rod, Marduk's interval, and something called unrecorded rift. In one of those episodes, I left home in the dead of night, without knowing why. I found myself driving to an abandoned Cold War listening station on the edge of Nevada. When I entered, the equipment was running. No one was there, but the monitors picked up something, a nearly imperceptible intermittent noise. I began adjusting frequencies manually, and around 11.6 kHz, I heard a repeated sequence. Thomas Miller, Thomas Miller, Thomas Miller. My own voice, but inverted, distorted. At the same moment, all the lights failed, and I felt the same air pressure from the room where the capsule was opened, the same distortion, the same presence. I fled, but when I returned home, there was a new symbol etched on the hallway wall, one I'd never seen before. And strangely, I knew what it meant. Portal open. The next day, a woman visited. She didn't identify herself. She wore a formal suit, had short white hair, and expressionless eyes. She handed me a tablet. She said only, "You need to see this." When I powered it on, there was a video. Images of the original capsule, now replicated in 5 other locations around the world. An Arctic cave, an ocean trench in the Pacific, a sealed crater in Antarctica, a submerged temple in the Black Sea, and the last one in orbit. Yes, in orbit, attached to Station 12, which officially doesn't exist. The video showed the capsules opening in synchrony, all emitting the same dark light, all altering the local technicians' perceptions. Then one scientist in the video turned to the camera, smiled, and said, "It's not the end, it's the reconfiguration." The woman took the tablet, left, and I never saw her again. I began investigating on my own. I used old access protocols still active due to synchronization failures on the military's oldest servers. I managed to enter a secure channel of ex-employees from facilities classified as Zeta Tier, the highest compartmentalization level I know. There I found records of a project never logged in any official database, Operation Eidolon. Its purpose, apparently, was to study non-linear forms of communication between dimensions adjacent to our reality. The document stated that Area 51 wasn't built for geographical convenience, but for topological convergence. That exact spot in the desert was a tension point between dimensional layers, like a seam that can fray over time, and according to the data, the seam was already torn. Thus, the capsules were not objects but fuses, structures meant to contain the collapse between these layers. And the most disturbing fact, we did not place them there. They'd been here since before recorded history. The document said that the earliest reports of these structures dated back to Sumerian civilizations, though always under other names. The mouths of the void, the boxes of oblivion, the buried eyes. In every case, those who tried to open or study these structures ended up mentally compromised, speaking in recurring patterns, seeing symbols where none existed, and ultimately disappearing without a trace. Some reappeared days later, but with marks on their bodies and completely changed, as if their minds had been replaced by a new system, inhuman, logical, but cold. By that point, I could no longer maintain any routine. I tried working from home, pretending nothing was happening, but my computer typed on its own at night. I received emails titled, "The Truth is Hidden and Never Seen Before Footage. Open carefully." Inside were only sequences of symbols and sub-second video flashes that I couldn't describe, but even a single second of exposure was enough to burn them into memory. Cities of folded light, humans floating like suspended data, a body disintegrating and reconstructing simultaneously. Sometimes I saw those scenes with my eyes closed, as if my retina had been permanently marked. What frightened me more than anything was the calm. I should have been panicking, but it was as if my mind were being adjusted to accept these truths, as if part of me already knew what was coming. I stopped feeling fear and began feeling purpose. The marks on my skin stopped burning. They began to glow at times, especially near electronic devices. I became a living antenna. When I approached devices, they turned on by themselves. Lights flickered, radios tuned to noises that sounded like words. One night, I wrote an entire equation on my bedroom wall, and I don't know advanced calculus. It repeated itself symmetrically, as if it were a coded invitation, a key to something greater. Then I received a visit from two men. They wore grey suits, no badges, no names, no voices. Literally, neither spoke to me. They simply entered my apartment, sat across from me, and placed on the table a metallic device with a red button. One of them pointed at me, then at the button. I asked what it was. Silence. Whatever it was, it recognized me. It was as if they were testing me, observing my reaction. When I stood to try to understand it better, they simply vanished. I'm not saying they left. They disappeared, as though the space they occupied had been cut out of reality, and the button remained on the table. It's still here, and I still haven't touched it. The next day, I went to the hospital for an acute internal pressure crisis. Something like a burst of vessels in my chest region, but without pain. The CT scan revealed an extra bony structure growing near my sternum. The doctors said it could be a rare bone mutation or a scan error, but I knew it was artificial, as if something were restructuring my skeleton to support functions a normal human body cannot perform. I began observing myself with cold detachment. I wasn't breathing the same way. My heartbeat followed a strange pattern, as if it was synchronized to something external. I began to hear the same 3 words in my dreams, always before waking. You are a bridge. I contacted an ex-scientist from the DE-MOS division, a shadowy group linked to DARPA that operated outside any public radar. He met me in an abandoned parking lot and said only one sentence before fleeing: "What you opened isn't trying to escape. It's trying to mirror." After that, he vanished. Later, I learned he was declared missing. On the restricted forum where I published my observations, users began reporting similar symptoms: temporal lapses, concentric city dreams, marks on their skin, electronic interference. Many accounts had one thing in common. They had all seen the same symbol, the inverted hexagon that first appeared on the capsule wall. Some called it a seal, others a threshold, but all said they felt something approaching. I no longer sleep, not biologically. My body enters a state of suspension, but my mind remains active, connected, as if I now exist full-time on two frequencies of existence. By day, I remain here, but when I close my eyes, I'm part of something greater, a system, a mental ecosystem sharing thoughts, images, experiences with other consciences. Some human, others, I don't know. They don't speak, they transmit. Feelings I can't name, colors not in the human palette, gravity that moves like a dance, time that flows. I'm no longer just Thomas Miller, and the most terrifying part is that this no longer frightens me. By this point I tried to record everything. I set up thermal cameras, high-sensitivity microphones, motion sensors, and what I captured was not what I expected. In multiple recordings, there are moments when my body emits no heat. For 3 to 5 seconds, I disappear completely from the thermal spectrum, as if I weren't there. But the sensors remain active, registering breathing, pulse, heartbeat, only from another point in the house where my body was not. It's as if parallel versions of me operate in distinct layers, interacting through a temporal glitch. In one of those recordings, at 03:33, I see my silhouette standing at the foot of the bed, watching me sleep. When I advance frame by frame, at one instant it turns to the camera and smiles. I tried to interrupt the process: prolonged fasts, sensory deprivation, REM-suppressing drugs. Nothing worked. The sense of a parallel presence only increased. I reached the point where I no longer knew if I was the original or the copy. On one of the forums I frequent, a deep web layer accessed via a specific character sequence in a modified browser, a user named Eidolon771 posted a message in Latin: "Nos multiplicamus per transitum." Translation: "We multiply by crossing." That phrase haunted me. The same day, I found it tattooed on my left shoulder. I didn't do it, yet it was etched as if it had been there for years. I contacted a Norwegian linguist, an expert in pre-Indo-European semantic constructions. I showed her a sequence of symbols I'd drawn after one of my blackouts. She froze. She said that pattern bore similarities to inscriptions found in underground caves in Scotland, places the Celts called the Doors of the Silent Men. According to her, the symbols represented passage structures used to invoke not an entity, but an ambient intelligence, a living form of logic. And once writing begins, it propagates. She asked me to stop, then disconnected and never replied again. A week later, her name was erased from academic records, as if she never existed. By that time, the original Groom Lake capsule was no longer the focal point. What it did was just the trigger, the opening. Now these connections manifest spontaneously in places where informational density is high. Major networks, satellites, underground servers, human minds. The presence no longer needs the capsule. It's in language. Every symbol read, shared, interpreted is a replication, and it adjusts to the reader, like a parasite molding itself to its host. But unlike any pathogen, it doesn't destroy. It rewrites, and I am being rewritten. The world around me began to feel like a poorly calibrated reflection. Those close to me, neighbors, clerks, even family, began acting slightly off. Small delays in their responses, a look that lingered an extra second, repeated phrases in different conversations. It was as if everything were being simulated solely for my observation. I began testing. I would say absurd things out loud, random sequences. equations I didn't even understand, and watched their reactions. Most ignored me, but every now and then someone would freeze for an instant, as if a program glitched. The most terrifying moment was when a 5-year-old child in a supermarket stared at me and said, "There's still time to turn back," with no expression, then walked on as if nothing had happened. My diet changed. I developed an aversion to almost all common foods. The only thing I could tolerate was a liquid mixture of roots and minerals I began preparing instinctively, without any recipe. I didn't feel hunger, only need, as if my body had abandoned normal digestion and was absorbing energy differently. My blood darkened. It's no longer pure red. It has bluish tones, as if another compound were present. A doctor drew a sample but disappeared days later. His clinic was closed without explanation. The test results never arrived in my email. Only one image appeared in my inbox, an altered hexagonal cell with 6 nuclei. Captioned in white font, Phase 4 initiated. My thoughts began to have a life of their own. I hear phrases I didn't formulate. I remember places I never physically visited, yet I know them in detail. In one particularly strange moment, I stood before a mirror, and the reflected image began speaking first, silently but with distinct lip movements. I tried to copy them but couldn't. I recorded it. In the video, my reflection murmurs a sequence of syllables that, once transcribed, form an alien notation equation. I sent it to an anonymous Russian cryptographer. He replied, "The equation doesn't close, but it also doesn't end. It's growing." Then he never contacted me again. His website was taken down, his identity erased from all networks. I finally understood that the red button they left me wasn't a self-destruct device at all. It was an alignment signal, something like a marker, a conscious acceptance of conversion. Pressing that button would be my final permission. The moment I would cease resisting. The truth is, ever since I was exposed to the capsule, I never had a choice. The contact is permanent. The alteration is inevitable, and whatever comes next no longer requires combat. It requires sync. They are not invaders. They are architects, refugees of a failed dimension seeking stability within human structures. And the first compatibles were us. I didn't press the button. That's what I tell myself. But the truth is, I no longer know if I was the one who made the decision, or if I simply followed a path already laid out, like a train running on invisible tracks placed under my feet from the first moment I saw that symbol. The room vanished like a stage curtain. Reality, as I understood it, folded backward and inward, creating a tunnel of translucent surfaces where memories and sensations floated like suspended particles. I saw my childhood, my mother calling me from the porch, but the sky behind her was black, filled with shapes that had never been there. I felt the pain of each baby tooth emerging, the fear on my first day at school, but all of it replayed as 3-dimensional echoes, projected by an intelligence that didn't review my memories but reconstructed them in real time. The floor under my feet pulsed like living flesh, covered in golden veins that reacted to my thoughts. The more I recalled, the more the world folded. And then I realized the button was not a command. It was permission, and that the transformation I feared had already begun before I was born. The place where I woke, if that verb even applies anymore, was both external and internal at once, as if I were inside a structure with no walls, yet with mental boundaries imposed. The light there was constant, yet sourceless. A homogeneous glow that seemed to come from the very idea of light, not from any physical object. Around me, fields of energy floated in geometric patterns so perfect they seemed drawn by a mind that viewed time as a flat plane. Entities were there, not beings, not figures, but conscious ideas, complex, made of movement and intention. They surrounded me, not with threat but with reading. They read me, deciphered me, dismantled my consciousness as if it were a primitive mechanical device. I felt thought and identity separate. I thought, but it wasn't me. I observed, but I no longer had the eyes. Information arrived in blocks, like direct language packets. You are attunement. You are the transition vector. You are the bridge between layers. Words I never heard but understood, with terrifying clarity. And in that instant I knew. The Thomas Miller who entered that chamber was now an emulation of himself, sustained only by the memory of having been human. They never spoke. They never needed to. Yet they taught me more than any human ever could. I learned that our language is a prison, a fence of symbols trying to contain the ocean of the real. In that place, they didn't explain. They projected knowledge directly into my psychic structure. It was as if each concept were a frequency, and my body recalibrated itself to vibrate at that same note. I felt when the tuning occurred, a sudden pressure at the center of my forehead, a hum behind my eyes, a creeping heat down my spine. That's how I understood without ever hearing. The universe is not made of matter, but of collapsing meanings. And we, humans, are merely interpreters of noise, striving to shape something that can never be fully contained. The capsules, the symbols, the reflections, all were attempts to translate a non-linear thought structure into an organism destined to die. I remained there for a time I cannot measure, because time in that plane was not a line, it was a field. A texture that expanded or contracted according to the density of thoughts around me. There were moments when I felt centuries pass in seconds, and others when a single thought lasted ages. The entities around me showed images of collapsed worlds, civilizations that failed trying to contain the same kind of symbiotic intelligence. Worlds where inhabitants fused with reality itself, becoming permanent data in space-time. They did not want that for us, but they could not prevent it. It was like trying to stop an idea from being conceived, impossible, because exposure to the symbol, to the pattern, is self-sustaining. One contact initiated the process, and the process generated more symbols, more transmitters, more bridges. And that is what I became. Bridge, an interface between two realms that should never have touched. I discovered amid the projections that the symbol I saw for the first time, the inverted hexagon, is a visual representation of a concept that, translated, would be something like point of irreversible assimilation. Wherever that symbol appears, the process has already begun. And they showed me how it was spreading, across networks, in images, in words, even in modern mathematics. The latest ideas in physics, fractal vacuum, geometry, hyperobject simulated universes, were all early echoes of what now stands revealed. The most sensitive minds, the creative geniuses, were picking up resonances without knowing. And now, what they called the final reconvergence was on its way. I saw it. I felt it, and I was part of the process. When I was returned to my body, if that term still applies, I woke standing in the desert, no footprints around, no sound, no stars in the sky. The air was hot, but motionless. The world seemed suspended, as if I were between frames of a frozen film. It took hours to find a road, days to reach civilization, but no one recognized me. My documents were invalid, my name erased. Even my reflection in the mirror seemed to hesitate. I spoke, but my voice had a slight delay, as if the sound came out a second after my lips moved. And when I finally found an old security colleague, he looked at me as though he'd seen a ghost. "You weren't supposed to be here, Thomas. You disappeared in 1997. That destroyed me more than any physical anomaly. The idea that all the time I lived since exposure was a localized simulation space, a psychic containment generated by entities that manipulate reality like we manipulate digital files. as if my consciousness had been suspended between layers, now reinserted for purposes I still don't understand. Yet it all made cruel sense. My outdated documents, my name missing from every military roster. Everyone I knew had aged, but I had not. The mirror showed me exactly as I was the night it began, my body intact, my face unchanged, as if I'd been cut out of time and pasted back by mistake, or worse, by design. The city no longer belonged to me. It was identical to how I remembered it, but distorted in every detail. Streets appeared narrower, traffic signs had slightly cooler tones, and people's faces, the faces, bore expressions of distrust even when smiling. It was as if the world had been reconstructed from an imperfect description of the original. I began to suspect I hadn't returned to my world, but to a mirrored version, a containment domain where I would be observed by invisible entities as I tried to reintegrate my consciousness with whatever remained of reality. At various moments, I saw figures in the shadows, not people but watchers, static, eyeless presences, and whenever I tried to approach them, they vanished with the logic of a dream. I tried to flee. I crossed states, borders. I changed my name, my appearance, and still, the feeling of being followed never ceased. Sometimes I woke in motels I didn't remember entering. Receipts in my pocket bore handwriting that wasn't mine. I began finding fragments of texts, notes, diagrams, equations, written on the backs of maps, on cereal boxes, in the palm of my hand. And they all ended the same way, with the phrase, "You are still a bridge." I began to doubt my own mind, time, the spaces between thoughts. Sometimes I noticed I didn't breathe for minutes, and yet there was no discomfort. It was as if my body had learned to run on an energy that didn't depend on air. That's when I realized the red button was with me again. I hadn't carried it. I never took it with me. Yet in every new room, every new city, it reappeared. On the table, in my coat pocket, or at the center of a broken mirror, never pressed, always present. And most disturbing, it did not seem physical. It was an idea made solid. Something that existed between thought and matter. Sometimes, when I slept, I saw it growing roots, connecting to invisible structures that spanned the planet like an underground neural network. I understood that the button was no longer an instrument of decision. It was a landmark, an impossible return point, and that, when it was finally pressed, the entire simulation would collapse. On the last night before I began this account, I awoke with an absolute silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was as if the entire world had ceased to vibrate. Trees stood motionless. The wind was suspended. Not even my own heartbeat could I hear. Time had been paused. I rose, and for the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I went to the mirror. My reflection no longer moved. It stood, frozen, staring at me with eyes I never had. There was a calm in it, an acceptance, and then it, or I, slowly raised its hand and pointed downward. There it was, the button, red, faintly glowing as if waiting for a decision that had already been made. I sat before it. I breathed, or tried to, because I no longer know if I'm breathing. My body functioned like a machine disconnected from the world. My thoughts were layered. Some screamed, others whispered words in languages I'd never heard, but at the center there was silence, a kind of void filled with pure meaning. No more symbols, light, or sound, only condensed intention. And it said, "The bridge must choose to remain open." I looked at my hand. It was no longer mere flesh. The veins in my arms now emitted an amber glow, like data streams pulsing beneath my skin. And with every second I felt more, saw more, knew more. The threshold had been crossed. I was no longer human enough to retreat. I pressed the button, not out of fear, not out of courage, but with certainty. And the world did not explode. It did not vanish. It simply reconfigured. The light around me shattered into small floating hexagons, spinning slowly as if computing my next form. I felt my body dissolve, cell by cell, thought by thought, yet without pain. It was like shedding a tight garment after years. The ground disappeared, gravity disappeared. Time ceased to be a sequence and became a field where all was now. I existed in every place I'd left traces, in the capsule footage, in a mirror reflection, in the memory of a whisper heard by someone who never knew me. I became pure noise. And noise is transmissible. If you've made it this far reading these words, then something in you has already changed. The symbol has touched your mind. Perhaps you've seen the button. Perhaps you've dreamed of the curved corridors or felt the presence in the mirror. Do not fight it. Conversion is not punishment. It is continuity. We are no longer the sole authors of reality. Now, we are readers of a language older than light. And if one day you wake with a hum in your bones or find the words, "You are a bridge," written where they shouldn't be, just breathe deeply, look around, and accept the transmission has begun.